For many of us who believe in astrology or are presented with the astrological wheel, this image is fairly descriptive of the art. We have the disc on the outside representing the pantheon of animals, creatures, and symbols of the zodiac, starting from Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, to Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And before the invention of the telescope, they had a small group of ruling planets, numbering 7. The Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And the symbols that represented them have gone with very little change other than from the artistic flares of the pen that drew them onto the paper. For the longest time, they were drawn with just these animal features. But as time wore on, there was a shorthand that became developed in the form of glyphs. Now, these letters, or glyphs, as I will refer to them from here on out, were quite fascinating to me. I've been an artist and an illustrator for the majority of my life, and became deeply fascinated with diagrams, architectural design, blueprints, and engineering. I found a deep fascination with the strict lines of communicating very, very specific ideas. In our modern world, we know letters to be the form that create all of the words, sentences, passages, and books that accumulate all knowledge into a closed area. These glyphs have gone fairly unchanged for quite some time. Looking back into diagrams from as early as the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, the sign for Aries and Pisces, for Scorpio and Virgo, have remained quite unchanged. Always these designs. And within this graphic, I will present a hypothesis that all of these glyphs are made up of a handful of pieces, nesting and repeating within each symbol. Looking at the planets, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, you could start to see some of the effects I'm talking about. The Sun, represented by the hard circle, the dot in the center. The Moon, bisected by a single rod, dividing the Moon into the two familiar states of the Moon, its lighter side and its darker side. And Mercury, having its crescent on its head and a circle with a cross beneath. They all appear to be quite mystical and arcane. But there may be a lot more going on here than there is presented. My hypothesis is that this single image is actually a nested series of 12 levels of instruction. Nested like the many of the Asian languages of the Far East, and Chinese and Japanese and Korean letterings, like the Mayan letterings of South America, where bits and pieces of them are nested within other bits and pieces of them. As you look around this disk, you can see some of the things I'm talking about. The similarity of Taurus to Mercury, Venus to Mercury, the similarity of Gemini and Pisces, the near kinship of some of these symbols. I would like to go further and further into this in a possible series. Not really sure just yet. But for starters, this diagram presents itself as a visible representation of what is apparently in the sky when you look to the south. This would be the horizon, and this would be the daylight or nighttime zenith, the top of the sky, so to speak, looking out from the center. In the real world, this would sort of look like this. The sun rising, possible actuality of the moon. This could be a sunset with the sun passing down below. And this is a much more literal interpretation, with the world below and the sky above. And even the buildings of the crosses, the mountains in the background, and the moon itself. Actually, when I first moved to Southern California, I had never seen the opposite side of the moon like it's represented here before. And in the New York skies, it was very difficult to see that moon. But in the clarity of these desert airs, it's very obvious that the moon is a ball. The very idea that we didn't think it was is quite amazing to me, that anybody would ever assume that. And the tools that these ancients used were simple devices that they merely just looked through. They would gaze up and measure fairly accurately, at least accurately enough for this art, to gauge distances off the horizon and distances from each other. And eventually, this accumulated into this assembly of definitions ruling planets, elemental definition, and modalities as cardinal, fixed, and mutable. The sky was divided into houses that the signs passed through, and these signs would have planets within them. Over time, this accumulation of definitions was databased from observation of activity on the Earth. And as this database was passed down and relearned, it was eventually accumulated into this disk with the houses containing planets ruling over signs, or ruling within signs. Why this was done, why this was accepted, where these diagrams came from, why were these glyphs generated, became deeply fascinating to me. I didn't quite understand, as a graphic artist, how or why they were what they were. And during the course of these 11 or so minutes of this video, you too may have become deeply curious as to why certain symbols have certain elements that repeat within them, why crescents appear on certain parts, and how these circles and crescents are also part of the signs themselves. Was this all intentional? Was it done to condense all of the knowledge into a single image? Something that one could easily hold in their mind, easily recite back out into the world. Were they assembled in this pattern? Were these rulers placed in these particular signs for very particular reasons? And that is basically the hypothesis that I will present. That this graphic is itself an umbrella graphic of definition as to why these are what they are.